common question I get asked is, how can I afford to travel so much? I started answering this question in part 1 by sharing how I was able to save to travel. Today I'm going to explain how I traveled the world on $30 per day. This video is about how to travel cheap around the world. The first thing I did was I tracked my monthly expenses and I budgeted my money. This helped me stay on track with my budget of $1,000 per month. I was able to see if I was spending too much and I was able to make adjustments that way. I was also able to see in what categories I was spending the most money. That way I could also make adjustments for that. Number 2 is accommodation, because one of your major expenses is going to be your accommodation. I was able to save money by staying mainly in hostels. Hostels, when I was in the Balkans, cost between $8 to about $12 a night. And when I was in Southeast Asia, it cost me about $5 per night, sometimes even $3. I did also book an Airbnb on occasion. That way I could have my own space. I would only book rooms in a house. This helped me save money instead of buying a whole house or a whole apartment. Just having my own room was enough. Couch surfing is another great option. I did couch surf twice and it actually helped me stay in budget because I had barely made my $30 a day budget. Barely. And if I wouldn't have couch surfed for those 2 nights when I was in Europe, I wouldn't have made it. If you're unfamiliar with couch surfing, it is a website that allows you to find accommodation for free. You get to meet locals and they will open up their homes to you. I know it sounds weird because it's free accommodation, but it's a website of travelers. The people who host are usually travelers themselves, and it's a great way to experience the local community. I didn't stay in any hotels during this trip, so I'm not going to go into how to find cheap hotels. However, if you are planning maybe a family vacation or you're just not really interested in hostels or Airbnb, I do know some accommodation hacks to score you cheaper hotel rooms. So if you'd like a video on how to find cheap accommodation, please let me know. The next big expense will be transportation. I saved money on transportation by avoiding flying whenever possible. Sometimes this meant long, multi-day bus journeys, but I saved hundreds of dollars by doing this compared to flying. Taking local transportation will also help save you a lot of money. For example, showing up at the bus station as compared to having your hostel or your hotel book accommodation for you. Or if you're familiar with Europe, showing up at the bus station as opposed to taking a Flixbus. Flixbus is also a great option, so is having your accommodation book transportation for you. I found that this was easy, convenient, and still a great deal. However, if you are trying to travel on $30 per day, the transportation does add up. So I think to do a combination of Flixbus and local buses will help save you so much money. When I did fly, I would take budget airlines. You can find budget airlines for very, very cheap. In Europe, there's flights sometimes for as cheap as $10. I was able to fly budget because I only had one backpack that was within the carry-on requirements. Traveling with one bag is convenient and saves you a lot of money. So if you are going backpacking or traveling around to multiple destinations, I would recommend traveling with one bag. I do plan to cover how to find cheap flights in a completely different video, so stay tuned for that. I don't want to get into it too much in this video. To cut down on transportation, I would also walk to the bus stations. The bus stations or the train stations were usually within the city limits. Sometimes I would have to walk up to an hour, sometimes even a little bit more, but I always did this as opposed to taking a taxi there or an Uber there because I was moving around a lot and this just really helped me save. If I was going to the airport was usually further out of town, so in this case I would take inner city buses. For example, when I flew into Myanmar, I think it cost about $10 for the taxi ride from the airport to my hostel. However, I took the local bus for 30 cents. 30 cents. In Bangkok, I had a similar experience. It was $20 for the taxi from the airport to my hostel, but I was able to take the local bus for only a couple of dollars. Next up is food and drink. I was able to save so much money on food and drink by eating street food. You've probably heard this one before, but eating street food is just a really great way to experience the local food on a budget. I would go to restaurants occasionally, however, this is mainly with friends that I had made at the hostels. Another way to save money is to cook your own food. I found that by doing this, I was able to save the most amount of money. If you do want to eat in a restaurant, avoid the touristy areas. That main touristy street is going to have overpriced food at their restaurants, so just walk a couple blocks, get away from the touristy areas, and have a sit-down meal in one of those places. Next up is activities. I personally did a lot of free walking tours and even a few free pub crawls. This is a great way to get to know the city, make some new friends, and learn the history of the place that you're in. A tip is required at the end. However, it is not too much money and it's worth it for the experience. Traveling to budget destinations also helps you do more than if you were going to more expensive destinations. So on my trip, I stuck mainly to the Balkans in Europe and Southeast Asia. I did go into Western Europe a little bit, but that was not the majority of my trip. My snorkeling trip on Koh Phi Phi Island, for example, only cost me $15 for a full day snorkeling trip. That activity there compared to that activity in somewhere like Hawaii, the prices aren't anywhere close. So that's why I went to budget destinations. That way I was able to do more activities because my money would go further. Now let's talk about ATMs and debit cards. It's best to get an online debit card with no ATM fees. A lot of times your bank will charge you, then the ATM will also charge you. If you're American, I would go with Charles Schwab. Charles Schwab doesn't charge you an ATM fee. Then they actually reimburse you for all of the ATM fees that the ATMs charged you. For example, that ATM in Thailand that charged me $7 each time I withdrew, they would give you that money back. When I traveled, I used one called TransferWise, which is also a good option. They don't charge any ATM fees. However, you are still paying the ATM when you withdraw the money. So it's good that I wasn't being double charged. However, I was still getting charged, which is why if you are American, I would recommend Charles Schwab. When withdrawing money at ATMs, you should also avoid ATMs outside, like the ones at 7-Elevens, the ones at your hostel, the ones at your hotel. It's best to use the ATMs at an actual bank. This is safer and they'll also have a lower exchange rate. The ATM will also charge less if you don't have a card like Charles Schwab that will refund you that money. Using an online card is also a safer alternative. I don't feel comfortable using my actual debit card at these ATMs. I feel much safer when I use an online debit card that I just transferred $200 in. So if something gets hacked or if something happens, that's only $200 I'm going to be missing as opposed to my entire bank account. When you're traveling, you should also avoid using your credit card as much as possible. I would use it to make online purchases such as my hostel or my Airbnb. However, I never used it in person. You are able to use it in person at cafes and restaurants and things. However, if they take it, they will charge you a credit card fee for using it. Additionally, you should always pay with local currency. Many places will take USD or euros, so sometimes people won't want to exchange their money. However, the exchange rate is going to be a lot higher. So even though you're paying with your US cash, you're paying more than if you would have been paying with the local currency, if that makes sense. You should also consider a travel credit card. You could rack up points before you leave to travel and then use these points to score you things like free flights. I didn't use this method for my trip. However, when I got back from my trip, I went to New Orleans and I was able to get both me and Jan free flights to New Orleans using my travel credit card. Lastly is travel insurance. This will be a higher upfront cost. However, if anything happens, if you get sick while you're traveling, then you're covered and you won't have to pay out of your pocket for those medical expenses. That is everything I did to travel the world on $30 per day. There are many other ways to travel cheap that I didn't mention, so if you would like me to make a more general guide, please let me know. Because I only shared tips that I personally use to travel on $30 per day, but there are so many more that I would love to share with you. It is possible to travel cheap around the world with the right research. If you like budget travel tips, please like this video so I'll know to make more videos like this in the future. Thank you for watching.